Locals and some intrepid tourists know the best-kept secrets of northern New Mexico are the series of isolated high-altitude villages on the so-called High Road to Taos. There's the village of Las Trampas, settled before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the Picris Pueblo that's been around even longer, the commercial hub of Penasco, and Truchas, setting of Robert Redford's Milagro Beanfield War. In the past, newspapers from nearby Santa Fe, Taos, Espanola, and even Albuquerque at least made an effort to cover sports, events, and other news from the villages. But as we all know, newsroom staffs have been slashed in the last decade, and the first thing to go was coverage of outlying rural areas like these. Basically, in the last 10 years, these communities have gone from underserved to completely unserved by any kind of media. But with that obvious problem comes an opportunity. As the regional papers retreated from villages like these, they left both communities and advertisers underserved. In fact, when the local community association here mailed out an 8-page quarterly newsletter a few years back, some local businesses were banging down the doors to buy ad space in the mailing and communicate with an otherwise unreachable audience. So our solution starts with a very basic hyper-local news portal, but expands in phases, with the overall goal of engaging the community on as many levels and at as many points as possible. In the local schools, working with seniors to offer trainings in internet and computer use, working with area organizations like the one that runs this historic theater, where we're collaborating on gathering some of the history of the building and on developing a tourism marketing plan with federal grant money. And with the absence of any municipal or other real local government of any prominence, we coordinate public forums and meetings on local issues. And all these efforts center around the hyperlocal site as the main source of information for the area, supplemented by mailings and brief print versions. Now, there are similar projects out there in other parts of the country, but those that target underserved rural areas have had mixed success, which is why we're going after such a high level of community engagement. We're hoping to create a model that works in geographically isolated and underserved areas that can be replicated. Long term, we'd like to see a network of such sites develop nationwide that can work together to share resources and attract ad spending from larger national companies. And speaking of revenue sources, in addition to appealing to forgotten rural advertisers, some of the other community engagement efforts also yield revenue, like creating and selling ads in a magazine-style tourism brochure for the area. To start us out, we've received seed money and training from the Society of Environmental Journalists, the University of Montana, and the Fund for Environmental Journalism. As for me, I've worked in rural community journalism my whole career, starting in Bush, Alaska, where I ran a small community radio station that was the only source for several isolated subarctic villages. I also run a statewide wire service whose mission is to get local news on underserved issues and communities from across the state into the larger news outlets. This is finally my attempt to get something going in my own hometown.